I'm Wayne McNaughton. I'm an anti-poverty activist here in Halifax. I've been doing this for about 20 years or so now. I have been living in poverty certainly since the beginning of since the early 2000s. I lived on income assistance for about 20 years, and just very recently I became 65 and started receiving old age security and a guaranteed income supplement. There's no dignity to being on income assistance, and income assistance is you have to justify everything that you do. You have to justify everything, and of course, on top of that, even when you've justified all of your needs and all this sort of stuff, you still don't get quite enough to live on, so that you basically get a very basic amount. If you really struggle and you really juggle really well, you'll get through the month sort of, and you'll rely to some extent on charities or gifts from other people. You can manage a little bit month to month, but it's very, very difficult, and heaven forbid anything special should come up or anything you need to do anything, because if you do need to replace anything, for example, in your house, you either have to seek charity, or you have to or else you have to go to your caseworker and make a case for why you need this, and it has to be something that's related to your health and well-being and so on, or related to your ability to look for work. It's a very, very, very degrading system, and you're constantly begging, basically, for enough to manage and enough to live. And that's the big thing, and you don't really get a lot of, and let's face it, when you have that tight a budget, you don't have choices. It's like the choice you have is to go to the store and get the cheapest thing you can get, and in not many cases that's not healthy food. In fact, it's rarely healthy food. You're looking for food that's filling and tasty and is still cheap. So that's not. Just to give an example, like when you're something to drink or whatever, it's like one of the ironies, you can get the a bottle of pop for around $1 usually, or $1 to $1.50. The same amount of juice is going to cost you like $4. You know, how are you going to eat healthy under those conditions? You can't. So that's the big thing. When I got onto old age security and the guaranteed income supplement, all of a sudden my income was adequate. I'm now actually at or slightly above the normal measures of the poverty line. Before I should say, when I was on income assistance, I had a total income of around $12,000 a year total. That's everything in. Now I've increased that by about 50% or so, more than that, with getting the guaranteed income supplement. It changes everything. It changes your ability. It gives you the ability to make decisions. It gives you, plus the fact that it's a secure income. I know that money's coming in every month, and that I can count on it. And the only change that'll happen is the income supplement may go up or down. If I really have noticed a big change, I've noticed the ability to buy things that I need to buy. I bought a new mattress for myself, which I could never have done before on income assistance. I very recently bought myself a new computer monitor, which I desperately needed. My one was 10 years old and not really working very well anymore. I was able to buy that. I mean, there's so much less stress. You know, it's what I would call a normal life. It gives you a normal, at least working class life. I mean, I'm not rich. I'm not rolling in dough, but I have enough to meet my needs, and I have enough to have a little bit extra to do things that I want, reasonable things that I want to do. And more importantly, it's, as I say, it's the security of knowing that's there. There was always an insecurity with income assistance, because it's always dependent on the worker approving of you receiving what you're receiving, and they can turn around and they can turn on a dime basically and say, okay, well, you didn't do this way, the way you were supposed to do it, so therefore we're going to take that benefit away from you. You know, like an example of is just an example with things like the various so-called special needs that they have. They call telephone a special need. They call transportation a special need. This is ridiculous. I mean, these are not special needs. These are necessities of life, and they are necessary to people's health. I got a letter saying I was approved for the OAS and that my application was in for the GIS. And the amount of GIS you get is based on the amount of other income that you have. And it's meant to top you up so that it brings you up to or at or near or slightly above the poverty line. And that's a huge difference compared to, as I say, welfare, which doesn't even care where people, welfare, they don't care where the poverty line is. They really don't. It's an arbitrary figure that they pulled out of the air and said, okay, this is enough for somebody to live on. The OAS is a fixed amount. So it's really a whole different way of looking at it. And that's what a basic income does. A basic income would be giving people an amount of money that is sufficient to meet their needs, sufficient to cover what they need and to give them a little bit of a cushion. Would, in fact, if it was properly implemented, eliminate poverty, completely eliminate it. It's possible to do that with a basic income, but the thing is, there's a lot of people that are employed in various positions with different nonprofits and with government and everything who are engaged in working with poverty and working at alleviating poverty or helping people to survive poverty. What I would suggest would happen is they would now be able to, instead of doing that, there's going to be a lot of work, a ton of work, helping people to overcome the damage that's been caused to them by poverty. Poverty does an enormous amount of damage, and the longer it goes on, and if it's intergenerational, even worse, does enormous damage to people. And to me, it's a little bit like what's happened with institutionalization that we finally done away with in most aspects in this country, whether it's the residential schools or whether it's institutions for the developmentally challenged or whatever. Those people were suddenly said, okay, here, you're now able to go out in the community, but it's going to take, a lot of those people are going to need support for the rest of their lives in order to be able to manage, because they've been so damaged by that system. And there's still going to be a lot of work to be done to fix that damage. And the same thing goes for poverty. There's going to be a lot of work needs to be done to help fix the damage. There's going to be people are going to need counseling on how to deal with having enough money, and now you're going to have people who still have mental health and addictions problems who are going to need help with those mental health and addiction problems more now than ever once you have an end to poverty. So I think there's lots to be done. But I think you can reallocate a lot of resources are being spent right now. A lot of human resources are being spent right now, just managing poverty. Instead of managing it, how do we help people deal with the effects that poverty has had on them? How do we help people with mental illness to recover from mental illness? That a properly implemented basic income would be one that does provide that basic amount that everyone needs, but also doesn't do it at the expense of other government programs or services that already exist or that should exist. When I say should exist, I think of, for example, we desperately need a much more subsidized child care system in this country, early childhood education system that is affordable for people, and not the current system that costs so much for people. We need full Medicare. That includes pharmacare. That includes home care. There needs to be much more social housing, and especially so in this case, because what's going to happen is you're going to have private landlords who may try to exploit the idea of people having a guaranteed income, and they will. The best way to combat that is to have enough social housing that the landlords don't have the option of raising rent. Anyway, those are things that need to happen. It can't take the place of these other existing programs. It should be supplemental to them. The other thing it won't take the place of is existing workplace pension plans and workplace benefit plans. It shouldn't be taking the place of those either, because those are things that people have earned and usually that are paid into by the employees and by the companies, and they should remain intact. That applies, for example, to the Canada Pension Plan. It's a standalone thing. It isn't supported by tax dollars. It's a standalone plan supported by contributions. It should remain. The same with unemployment insurance. It should remain. You can change those things a little bit, or you can adjust them a little bit, but the necessity for those things to continue is there. I think there's a good argument to be made for maintaining those things. When you have a system right now, for example, that they say, okay, well, we can't increase welfare rates anymore because then people on welfare would be making more than people getting minimum wage. And I'm going, I want to tear my hair out by my roots, and I know I'm not the only one. You know, like, you need to find a way to help people that are living in poverty, whatever the cause of their poverty is. If poverty is due to being unemployed or disabled, fine, they should receive help. If their poverty is due to having a low income, a low wage job, or only a part-time job, fine, help them. I think of how much could be done in society. When people say about a basic income being a game changer, it would be a game changer. And it's going to be necessary, because as we start to, as I say, all of these sort of jobs that people take because they have to have a job, because they have to be able to support themselves. They don't really want to do the job, but they have to do that. Well, guess what? A lot of those jobs are going to disappear anyway. Mm-hmm. Automation's coming, and it's coming fast. And it's really interesting to see some of the stuff that was coming out of Davos just the last few days, where they have these things, and they said that what these business leaders are saying in private is very different than what they're saying in public. And what they're saying in private is automation is coming, and it's coming now, right away. We're going to get it on this as fast as we possibly can. Yeah. And so it's not a case of waiting 10 years or 20 years to make it happen. If they wait 10 years or 20 years, it'll be too late. There's going to be chaos. Well, how many people would have elderly relatives or sick relatives that they would love to be able to take care of for full time and can't do it because they just don't have they have to get out, and they have to go out and take a paying job. But they would much rather be doing, much rather be a homemaker. There's a lot of people that people should have should certainly have the ability to access affordable childcare so they can get out and take a job. But for what we have right now is a situation of people having childcare and so they can go out and take a minimum wage job as a cashier at a convenience store. I don't think that's necessarily what they want to be doing. That's not exactly fulfilling work. I wonder how many of those people would much rather be home with their families, raising their families. And there's nothing wrong with that. That should be an option that's available to people. And it would be if you had a basic income. I think we move forward by starting to look at, as I say, they have to look at the way they collect taxes and the way that they distribute income. And so we're talking about there's enough money in the system. It's just that it's not being distributed in a way that is good for people. A good saying that I like to hear is that what would happen to the richest people in Canada if they paid more taxes? They'd still be the richest people in Canada. There's room to maneuver there. We spent far too much of the last 30 years, and this is comes from outside mostly. This is coming mostly from America and from other places as well. But where we've been reducing the taxes and reducing the taxes and reducing the taxes on there was a time in Canada when more than 50% of federal revenue came from corporate taxes. That was only like 30 years ago. Now it's like 10% comes from corporate taxes. How did that happen? Well, it happened because big corporations and people that are wealthy pushed that idea through over and over again, and got helped by people like Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan and their successors in doing it. So we need to look at how that works and how we can better distribute that money. And one of the things they can look at doing is look at existing tax credits and how can they strengthen those tax credits, whether it's the Canada Child Benefit that I mentioned, whether it's other tax credits that are available. Maybe it's a case of looking at some of the tax. Someone has suggested of, say, making the non-refundable tax credits into refundable tax credits. I think that's a good idea. would say he needs to do it because the current system is not working. It's leaving far too many people in poverty that is far too deep. And also he needs to do something to help people who are just, and this has been a chronic problem in Nova Scotia, living on too low an income. They're not on welfare, they're just living on too low an income. He could be doing something about that. He can't do it alone. He needs to get the feds on side. I mean, but I would love to see him taking the lead and going to the federal government and saying, we'd like to see this implemented and we think it could make a difference, not just for Nova Scotians, but for the rest of the country. I mean, he's of the same political stripe as the Prime Minister. I mean, I would think that they'd at least be able to have a conversation. These are not new ideas, but what it is an idea whose time has come. And its time has come because, in large part, of changes that are taking place anyway. Automation is happening anyway. Artificial intelligence is happening anyway. We're going to need a new way of dealing with this, and the basic income is the most promising thing that maybe can help to deal with that, can provide a different way of distributing the wealth of society so that these other things can proceed.